Okay, so resuming where I just was, sorry, I had to pause that last video. This is now part two. So the ideal teacher, I was about to say, I think teachers have under a gaze around this notion of what is effective and how do teachers do their work in a competent way. What do we consider as the ideal? I think the community attitude in regards to that, as opposed to, say, engineers, doctors, perhaps more so, but for teachers, there is something in the fact that they work with our children, predominantly, and whatever age you may look at. And if we look at secondary teachers, obviously that's teenagers. But the community notion or the popular cultural notion of what an ideal teacher is, people have generally have quite a lot to say about that. We feel that we can pass judgment in a way on what teachers do in some regards because we hold them quite accountable because they are the shepherds, as it were, of children's education. We have given over to them as a society through culture, through historical changes. We've given them the responsibility of our children's future, and you hear that a lot. That teachers, and they themselves say this about their own profession, that they change the world, they make a difference, they change young minds for the better, they unlock potential. All of these ideas influence then the community's own high standing of what teachers should be doing in regards to that particular work within the social fabric of our society. So when, particularly parents, when you become a parent and then you have your own children, and I know for my own kids, I have very high expectations of what I hope school can give them. Obviously, we know that that's so important, and we'll have more discussions about this down the line, about home and how important that is to children's engagement in school and their success in learning. But anyway, still, I then hold the teachers, and certainly as my children get older and the learning becomes more rigorous, intense, less play-based, more formalized, as that happens, I'll have a very particular view of what I think should be going on in my daughter's school, classroom, the relationship she has with the teacher, what that teacher is doing. And in some ways, I feel a little bit sorry for my children's future teachers because this is my career, right? And particularly now I'm an academic researcher around all this stuff. So, but regardless, I think that idea, and it's important for you to think about and reflect on in yourself, this notion of, what do I think the ideal teacher is? What does everybody else think the ideal teacher is? Can I meet my own expectations? Can I meet everyone else's expectations, whether that's society, the media, politicians, whoever? So enough on that. So the chapter then continues on this notion of what is an effective teacher. And I've just highlighted a few things I wanted to emphasize myself in terms of the ideas that I quite agree upon. So I like this notion from Walk 2008, suggests that teachers need to emphasize such joys as finding the pleasure in learning. So that's a really big one, and it's interesting that it's right off the top there. Obviously, there are other things in that particular section on page 5, but this notion of teachers being able to facilitate in the young people that they engage with the pleasure in learning about a particular subject or content area or the mastery of skill. It's so important. It's so hard to do, though, particularly in the teenage years when kids are younger, particularly in primary and lower primary, that kind of joy and love and pleasure of learning, that positive emotions that are associated with being exposed to new things and doing new things. By the time they're 15, 16 years old, has worn thin for some kids. Not all, but some kids, and it depends on the socioeconomic background as well to a large extent. But that for teachers having to overcome in some regards, the lack of that you are, it is on you to transmit those positive emotions around learning to your students, and they may be very lackluster, it may be non-existent or negative. That's hard work. That's really hard work. So it sounds good in theory. It's really hard in secondary school in some contexts to do that. Doesn't mean that it can't happen, but and it does in a lot of classrooms and in some schools in particular. Moving to what Brighthouse says here in 1995, it's quite, one would think 1995, quite a dated quote. I don't think it's dated at all. In fact, I have used this many times in the lectures that I've delivered face-to-face with education students, this exact list here, and presented students with it. And really, this notion of teachers being both an optimist and a realist, I think beautifully ties in with where this chapter started, that you need to acknowledge the challenges, the ambiguities, the paradoxes, the complexity in teaching, the political nature of it, the intensity of teachers' work, the fact that it's harder now, I feel, to be a teacher than any other time in history. I truly believe that. So you need to be a realist about that. You need to understand the challenges that teachers face every day, whether it's with their students, whether it's with staff and maintaining that collegial atmosphere and teamwork, whether it is, the challenge of simply doing the stuff of teaching and learning, which I'm sure you're getting into teaching for one reason or another. You want to be a teacher and do learning design, deliver it, watch students learn and grow and change their lives for the better. And it's, that's all very good reasons to become a teacher, but how hard that can be given the current context of testing, over-testing, standardized tests, and the effects of those tests, so that there's a lot of emphasis put on the results and the data, and teachers having to deal with large amounts of data, and the emphasis on teachers demonstrating incremental progress with their students and being able to chart that empirically, meaning, they give hard data around that. And as well, how some schools are underfunded and they don't have enough resources, or the buildings are crumbling and falling down around them, or if you work in remote or regional areas, the challenges that poses, teaching kids from diverse backgrounds, whether they be refugees and migrants, Indigenous kids from all different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, all of that, the real hard work of teaching. You have to be realistic about that. You can't ignore it. You can't just turn a blind eye to it. You can't stick your head in the sand. You have to acknowledge that that's part of the work, and it's going to, in a large part, determine your satisfaction with the work. But at the same time, as Brighthouse notes, you must also be an optimist as often as you can, and at your core, that's really how you need to approach the work. You have to approach it optimistically. You have to work. For some people, it takes more work, others less, but everyone works at this. You have to feel that the future is bright and positive for students, for schools, for education in general in this country. For yourself as a practitioner within that very complex system, you have to feel that, yes, you can make a difference. You can do good things every day, small things, sometimes larger change at other times. But, that really being a teacher is in equal measure, you're 50-50, an optimist and a realist. And I think the most successful teachers often are. So as well on page 5, I also like this quote by this idea from Hughes, 2004, at the bottom of the page, where outlines the need for a teacher to have humanity and warmth, and the notion of care. And again, that's, I guess, tied to this notion of being an optimist, is you must be optimistic about people. You must have I think empathy is so key, and that's mentioned elsewhere here. But this notion of being connected with your fellow humans, whether they be younger than you, your students, whether they be similar age, colleagues and peers, parents, whoever you connect with in a school. And if anything, teaching is an intensely human enterprise. Of course it is. If you don't like people, teaching is the wrong profession for you. Education, more broadly, is the wrong profession for you. You must care for people in some shape or form. You must like working with others. If you don't, as I just mentioned, teaching is the wrong place for you. It really is, and education, and certainly high school teaching, because the people you deal with, if we just focus on students for a moment, the people you deal with, as was set out in the beginning of this chapter, are highly ambiguous. Teenagers are some of the most ambiguous people you're ever going to meet. That's the whole point of being a teenager, isn't it? Isn't that what you were like when you were a teenager? Kind of ambiguous. You're trying out different things. You're playing around with who you're going to become. And you do things that you don't know why you did them. And you say things just for the sake of it. Because various reasons. You want to be cool. You just want to try ideas and see how they fit. So that idea of wanting to work with even the most ambiguous people around teenagers, you have to be warm about that. And if you can approach teaching with warmth and working with people with warmth, it tends to kind of come back to you. It's hard to do sometimes, but when it does happen, when there is the warmth around the interpersonal relationships, the warmth around learning, the warmth around hope for the future, that optimistic sense that yes, you can learn this, you can achieve, you can realize your goals, all of that stuff. You must be that way, and it is very challenging in the current environment to be warm sometimes in the classroom, but it's absolutely vital. I'm going to pause this part here once again, just because we're reaching the upper limit of what's allowable on YouTube, which is a 15-minute limit. I've got a small little end video that will finish off this particular series.